mentality. If you don't want to play that way, don't play that way. Break.
That was the clip from, that's at the end of the show, right?
Towards the end, yeah.
Yeah, of The Last Dance, the documentary on Netflix about Michael Jordan and their, I guess it really revolves around their 97-98 season, but it covers his legacy from his history from really childhood, from college into the NBA, through the NBA, when he took a break from the NBA, back to winning another 3 championships and then retiring. And we're here with me and Joe Musselman to talk about what the Chicago Bulls, Michael Jordan mean to him, and what that show means to all of us, and what we can all take away from it. So, Joe, what's up? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so so much to say on that clip. I watched, I've twilighted with this series now every night and rewatched episodes in parts, mainly because it was such an influential time for me that I'm emotionally anchored with that time of my life, mainly for personal reasons, not professional reasons. Like, some folks watching this now are deep into their professional career and they get all amped up to watch a champion like Michael Jordan talk about things like leadership and things like winning and losing and managing personalities on a team and leading personalities on a team. But for me, it's so much more than that. I watched every single Bulls game with my father, every single one. And those are the times in my life that I look back at. And first of all, how blessed am I to be able to have quality time like that with my dad and my father. And, the ups and the downs. Luckily, there weren't many downs in those 6 to 8 years with the Bulls. They will always be arguably the best team, but only arguably to those who didn't watch them play in real time. So it's stamped all over that team. It's stamped all over Michael Jordan that he is, without a question, the greatest player that has ever walked on the court. And it's beyond bias at this point, because I've looked at it. You can look at things like numbers, but we all know that the CEO that brings in more revenue does not make him the better CEO. It's just plain as day for me. So there may be people that outscored him in seasons, and there may be people that had more triple doubles than he did in any given season, but we all know that numbers don't quantify leadership, and numbers don't always quantify greatness. So you can have 2 CEOs that bring in the same revenue every year, and one is known to be the greatest, most liked CEO, and the other one is hated, but yet the numbers are the same. So there's more that goes into leadership than numbers. And that's what Michael Jordan brought to that team. So to tee up that clip, out of the 10 episodes, I would say that, ironically, that 2-minute and 23-second clip that I randomly said, you know what, there's something about this clip, and I held it up to my laptop and I recorded it, and I looked, I was like, they had a 3-peat, so there's the 2, and then 23 is obviously Michael Jordan's number. So I thought that was ironic. But I've broken down that 2-minute and 23-second clip to the word, to the letter, and even researched nonverbal cues and signs, and pulled up interrogation reports about what certain hand gestures mean or don't mean, and what face. I mean, I really got into it, man, because I don't have the skill set to look at that as an interpreter of nonverbal language like a CIA investigator and can just read what's going on. So I had to do a lot of research on what certain gestures meant. And there's also a point in this clip where he changes tense, meaning the whole clip he speaks in the past tense, and then in the very last part, he switches and speaks in a present tense. What does that mean? Why did he do that? Totally subconsciously. So anyways, there's a lot to go through here. As you can see, I have goosebumps talking about it. I had this conversation a few nights ago with a very close friend and an exceptional leader from the SEAL teams. And we had a great conversation about what he took away from that. So I'd love to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, same here. So just for starters, so everyone's on the same page. This show ran from mid-April to mid-May of this year, 2020. So you've probably seen it because you didn't have anything else to do. And we're also, so I remember watching the Bulls as a kid on TV, on a little like 13-inch TV, and you can't even tell whose number is who because it's so low resolution. It's for HD TV and everything. And just watching Jordan play, I was a little kid. When they won their last championship, I would have been 12. So it's just, it was a special thing to get to watch. I remember when he went to go play baseball. I remember when Space Jam came out. I remember when his father was murdered. And I remember the saga of Michael Jordan. But now that I'm older and I watch this documentary back and you hear him talk about it and you watch the games, one thing that you would believe that your memory, how your memory lies to you and you remember things bigger than they are. Like, do you remember when you first moved to a new city, how big that city seems and how lost you are in it, and then after a while it gets smaller and smaller?
That's right.
But watching Jordan, that's not how I felt. Like my memory, it was the opposite. I remember it less. Like the way, like that man can fly. Like he can fly through the air. He hovers in the sky. He dominates in ways that like you would think your imagination was playing tricks on you. Your memory was playing tricks on you, but it really was insane. And
that's right.
And I'm getting every episode had me choked up, goosebumps, wanting to go do something. Like I wanted to go like be active in something again, like competition, which I haven't done in a long time. Just watching that, it's just so invigorating.
Well, the greats do that, right? So let's think about this for a second. As a culture, the world every 4 years becomes enamored with sport, right? The Olympics, you watch the Olympics and the greats make it look doable. So, you think, I mean, for Christ's sake, curling, you're like, it can't be that hard. It's that hard. Okay, I've tried. It's that hard. I looked like such a fool. And you think those people like frantically, sweeping ice. Oh, there's no athleticism to that or strategy. It's like, yes, no, there really is. And it was that way with the greats. The greats do that. You want to paint like Picasso. You want to fly like Michael. You want to be like Mike. Like the greats instill this. They make it look so easy and fascinating. But what we don't see, like we see with Michael, being raised in a very competitive household with what you don't hear much about, his sister, Roz. You don't hear much about his brother who was in the army for 30 plus years. You don't hear about his mother and father who were driven by morals and values as parents in at that time, which was still a very kind of racially charged North Carolina. But they led with values and hard work and don't let anyone tell you can't do things. So there was so much of the parent story that resonated with me as a child because they sounded like, when Michael talked about his parents, he sounded like he was talking about my parents. And as a child, to say, Michael's talking about his parents and his sister. My sister was a huge driving force in my life and my competitive spirit. Like she was 4 years ahead of me in everything. So she had a real upper hand in basketball. Even growing up, like trying to beat my sister in basketball was a challenge for the first 6 to 8 years of my life until I was like 8 to 9 years old. Could I actually beat my sister in basketball? It took a long time, man. So I saw the kind of the associative, like how he would always talk about his parents and his family being such a driving force. I was like, my family's like that. So I could be like Mike too, right? Like it didn't have to be about basketball. It just had to be about life. So he was influential in planting a lot of seeds early in my childhood that made me understand competition differently, that made me understand myself differently.
That's what we're really here to talk about. I think that's what this show is really about. Whether, I guess it's how you look at it. I guess it's perspective. But when I watch something like this, I I always tend to try to figure out how I can associate it with my life or with the bigger meaning behind things, not just what happened, but what the meaning behind what happened is. And for me, it all starts with something that happened early on in the show where Michael Jordan talks about his first season with the Bulls, and they're like the traveling cocaine circus or whatever. And they're out partying, and he's at a hotel, and he goes up to, as a rookie, and he goes up to the room and opens the door, and they're in there with, drugs and drinking and women, and he shuts the door and leaves and goes downstairs and talks about how he was kind of a loner from that point forward. But to me, that's a pivotal moment to make that decision when your peers who are senior to you are doing something and that you don't agree with because you're there to play the game to be the best. He's already so single-minded focused on being the best player in basketball that he turns away from that from his team, who he knows is doing the wrong thing in the sense that it's not going to get him any closer to his goals, and leaves and decides to be an outcast in that sense. And set the standard. Like, no, that's not what we're doing. That's not what I'm doing. I'm here to play basketball.
It's funny that resonated with you, because that totally resonated with me. And here's why. Because I most likely, no, I can say with absolute certainty, I would not have been able to do that at his age. Not a chance. To be disciplined in moments of distraction is a really hard thing to do. If you want to get really deep about this, there was a study that was done about, they broke down percentages of population of the 1930s population as the rise of Hitler was happening, and the onboarding. And he didn't just rise to power on accident. He was able to convince tens of millions of people that this was a great idea. And so lots of people now, it's easy for us to say, oh, I would have never have done that. Well, statistically, yes, you would have. You absolutely would have. You would have supported a movement like that, especially in the time and in the culture. And, coming from a place of Europe in that moment in history, you would have done that. I would not have been able to walk out of that room, close the door, went back to my room and just said to myself, well, it looks like I'm going to be kind of doing my own thing. I would not have had the courage to do that. That type of discipline over distraction is why the greats are so inspiring. And it gave us a glimpse as to how he lived his entire career. Some of those behind the scenes that we saw, that's why I was so obsessed with The Last Dance for like a year now. I've been waiting for this thing to come out. It's like a window into a time in my life that I had never seen pulled together in such a kind of fantastical way into the background of that team that impacted my life in such a big way. But that's why it resonated with me, is I wouldn't have had that type of courage at that moment in my life that he did.
It reminded me of, so my first deployment to Afghanistan was in 2009, and I was doing an individual augmentee billet. So I was working at the detainee facility in Bagram, Afghanistan. And that was ranked the number one highest stressful job in the Navy for the years that the Navy was doing it, above, SOCOM, whatever, any special, NSW. It was ranked as more stressful because of what we were doing on a daily basis, and the training prior to it to prepare us for what we were going to do over there was unsatisfactory from a mental kind of like the training we had to deal with it mentally was unsatisfactory compared to the training we had to just do the monotonous day-to-day operations.
Got it.
There was no coping, no dealing with the weird stuff that you wouldn't get anywhere else, where people like throw poop in your face, or you see people like you have to deal with like seeing weird stuff. And I won't get into any more than that to not violate any of my NDAs. So
Sure.
So we're over there, and early on in that deployment, which I volunteered for, I wanted to be there. We had our barracks over there on Bagram, and there was pallets of O'Doul's and near beer, and people would hang out every night, and for some reason, they would go drink O'Doul's and party it up in the gazebo that we had outside of the barracks in our little like quadrant area. because Bagram's a huge base. It's like a city. And I would see like kind of like what they're doing up late, hanging out with each other, you know, doing whatever. And I'd be like, I'm just going to go to sleep. And I never really got into that. And I was like, I would wake up, you know, 3:30 in the morning. I would go to the gym. 5 a.m. I would go to work, and I never kind of socialized. I was either working out, or I was in my rack. And you know what? That made me so much better at my job, and it made me happier psychologically, less stress. Like if you're there to do a job, and then I never turned back from that. Like any other thing that I did, I was like, I'm just here to do this job. That's it. I'm here. I'm focused, single-minded focus, and that's it. And so it improved my performance, improved my mental well-being. It improved my leadership. You know, everything was my interactions with my peers. Everything was better because I was only there for one thing, and everyone knew it, you know? And that's the standard, and that's the standard that was set. So if anybody had to look to somebody and what they're doing, just do what I'm doing. It's too easy. Just go to sleep, you know, wake up, do your job. We're here to do a job. You know, this isn't playtime. We're here to do a job. So
that's right.
I thought that was a big moment. It was a defining moment I believe for Jordan and for that team, and his place on the team was kind of starting to develop right there, right in the beginning of his first season.
Yeah, I agree. And those are also the parts of people's career that never get shown. Like those small moments, right? Which is any insight that I could have into the quiet moments of that man's life I wanted to have, which is, again, why I was so excited about this documentary. And, I put myself back at 21, 22 years old, which was when he was going to be faced with that decision, young rookie, walking in to a hotel room to see, basically all the vices that make men weaker. And like I said, I don't know. I don't think I would have had the courage to walk away from that. I've always had to learn lessons in that point in my life, that stage, that era, that season. I learned lessons the hard way. And it's something I openly talk about often and revisit often, but it was those hard lessons that definitely rightened my path, into the next season of my life, which was the foundation work that I did. And that was the Navy and service and all of those things, kind of righted my path. But I was so interested how that opened up. And this from going through the foundation, for the folks listening, I created something called the Honor Foundation in 2013. And it's our nation's first career transition institute for Navy SEALs and the U.S. Special Operations community. We were blessed enough to have Max come through as a fellow and came through our program. And he knows how much I love to ask deep, meaningful, tough questions. And this, Michael, in this part of the interview, he was asked a tough question. And for me, the most telling part of a tough question, and I've learned to wait in the awkwardness, in the silence. Before, I would try to fill that void with maybe some justifying remarks. You ask a tough question, there's a pause, you start to feel awkward, and we naturally want to fill that silence with something to make it less awkward. So fill in the blank of whatever it might be. But the person who asked him this question was smart enough to allow the pause to happen and then let Michael take us where he went, where he wanted to go with that. And that's also a big part of even running a podcast. It's like, I want to ask questions, and then I'm going to sit and I want to be silent and see where they take it. Anything I do will take them off of their path. Anything I say or a movement, it's like, how still can you be to get the true remark from that person? And the interviewer asked Michael, has your success come at the expense of being perceived as a nice guy? And, he verbal filled a bit, was like, yeah, winning has a price. And he went right to it, right? His gut took him right to 4 things. He said, winning has a price, leadership has a price. Those 2 comments alone, he starts to kind of justify for folks who may be watching this, because he gets who the audience is, right? In this 2-minute and 23-second clip, it's like he goes through this internal journey of his life of leadership and winning at all costs and competition, and just he was a ferocious lion of competitiveness. And this whole answer is kind of a no shit true moment where he starts to go through, the justification really on why he was the way he was. And then he followed up with two things after that that struck me. He goes, I pulled people along that didn't want to be pulled, and I challenged people that didn't want to be challenged. His segue then talks about, I earned that right. So let's just talk about those four things real quick. I think this will be fun.
Yeah.
Winning has a price. Leadership has a price. Both true statements. And in my last conversation that I had about this, he brought up a great point. He said that, yes, he agreed. No truer statements than winning has a price and leadership has a price. And then he brought up a word that I thought was very interesting, but it's how you implement your leadership that will determine the price paid. And I thought that was fairly profound, right? So he wasn't necessarily complaining about the price that he had to pay. He wasn't complaining or even arguing the fact that leadership, of course, has a price. The amount of discipline that he had has a price. Pulling people along that didn't want to be pulled, challenging people that didn't want to be challenged, all of that, he's not like having a problem with that. What he's really thinking about is, could I have implemented that differently? And I think we all, any of us who have ever been in any leadership position, we know that there was a price. I have more disappointments in my own leadership than I've ever had about any of what anyone would call a success. No question. It's like, how did I not see it then? Like, how did I implement it that way, or with such a harsh fist, or just not with, more empathy or whatever it might be. But anyways, I thought that was really true. The implementation of all of that is what he's really thinking about there. And anyway, so I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
Well, for one, I think what I really like about what you said is how, when you said you think about your leadership, what I was going to say, but it was the first thing you said is it's how you have to live with it first, right? So you're the one who has to live with the price of your decisions, and not just leadership, everything in life. It's not like you said, and I did those things and people didn't like me. It's, how do you accept how you did it? Like you have to reconcile, like, man, I can't believe that I did that. I was back then. Like, I wish I knew then what I knew now, or I wish I could go back and do that differently. It's funny because that's what we really think about, right? That's like, it's our internal kind of conflict with our decision-making, which I look at as, I've always been someone who, since childhood, I've looked at things as like, I call it absolute acceptance. Like, if something happens, you have to accept it immediately and completely, and that's the only way that you're going to move forward. And sometimes you have to accept that you did something bad, and if you wallow in guilt, then you'll never make up for it. You'll never do anything right as a result of it, and then you'll never progress and get to a place where you can make a better choice next time. So
that's right.
Yeah. So, I had to accept a lot of bad things in my life, like bad family, when I was a kid, bad childhood, bad things that happen in your life, bad things that happen in the military, mistakes that you make, but you have to go, okay, well, that happened. I can't change it. Right. So now I just have to go along with it. Now I might be getting a little off on a tangent there, but,
it's true. It's mistakes happen, right? This is something I have come to, and the author, for the folks listening, if you want to read a great book about tactical application, and a framework around tactical application, you should read Ray Dalio's book called Principles. And you don't become the wealthiest hedge fund and the most successful by numbers hedge fund in the world without being disciplined over distraction, without having a rigorous set of principles that you operate by, and you're aligned as an organization. Like the greats are all aligned. There's no compromising their alignment. And there's one thing I've learned about myself too, looking back at situations where I may have made mistakes, but mistakes are always going to happen. It's a fact of life. If they happen again, now it's a pattern. So we do have the opportunity to look back and say, that's the refreshing thing about all this, is when I look back and I do feel that I made mistakes, and I made poor, decisions regarding my own leadership, I would say that it's only a mistake. It becomes a pattern if you don't fix it. So we have a deep sigh of relief in that when we look back, we absolutely have the opportunity to change that. Now, it's tough when you're, approaching 60 and you're a pro athlete, and you look back and they're actually, it's tough to think that you can't have that ability in the same capacity to not make those same mistakes again, where, mistakes in business, you will keep going and keep leading and keep rising and have, building up scar tissue. And I look at Michael as almost like a philosopher at this point of philosopher of play. Like he's spending more time thinking about his time than he probably ever did while he was playing, because he was very present in the moment. And now he's reached the point, the pinnacle, all that, and he's just sitting and he's thinking about all of these different things, which is why we saw the emotion come out. And so there's another thing too, going on to the this is great from even a military perspective, inside the SEAL community and in the Navy community and in most communities. Just because you make it through training doesn't mean you're done. Like you now are a new person, you're a new guy, you're a new man or woman in a team, and you have to earn it all over again, right? And he says something here that I thought was interesting. When he talked about pulling people that didn't want to be pulled and challenging people that didn't want to be challenged, he immediately goes into, I earned that right? Like I earned that right. My teammates came after me. They didn't endure what I endured. And they flashed to injury, pressure situations, the physicality that other teams beat the hell out of Michael because he was Michael. They flash to all that montage, and then it goes back to him. And I think that there's something to that that's it's a great lesson for me and for all the leaders that are listening to this podcast. You have in fact earned the right to be a leader, although you wouldn't be in that position. But there's like a yes and to that, where yes, you may have earned the right because of actions you've taken, ideas that you've had, effort and work that you've put in. It's hard, very hard, to then put yourself in another person's shoes, practice fierce empathy in the way that they are coming into a world that you have created, and truly understand that it's not that they don't care that you've earned the right. That's not the right way to think about it. But they're trying to earn their own rights in the same way you did. They want to earn ownership. They want to earn respect. They want to know that if they work hard, that they too can be a leader in the organization. And there's an attitude that exists. And I'm not saying Michael had this. I'm just saying this is what he said, where I earned that right. It's like, yes, you most certainly did. I'm wondering how he made other people feel in regards to that type of internal attitude. Does that make sense?
It does. And so it makes total sense. And here's what I was going to say about it. And I was actually going to, I want to get to exactly the same thing that you just got to, which is very common in leadership. I'm guilty. I think everyone has been guilty at some point. If you haven't, that'd be incredible. And it's also the biggest threat that we all face, which is kind of the sense that, and this is, I'm going to quote from the podcast I did a couple days ago, which is this goes back, throughout history. This is one of the well-known philosophies of war and civilization, which is the greatest threats don't come from without; they come from within. And a civilization. And I was just watching Avengers last night, and it even comes up in Avengers, or Captain America: Civil War, where the bad guy's like, I knew I could never kill the Avengers, but if I made them kill themselves, then I win. And what I'm getting at is ego, right? And pride is the biggest threat that you probably face when you're great. You know, when you're great, truly great, the biggest threat is yourself, because Michael Jordan in this case. So Michael Jordan, the way he acted, the way he played the game, the way he believes, it's like, you know, that old saying too, whether you believe you can or you can't, you're right, you know?
Right.
And you see that all the time. Michael Jordan always knew he could. He's like, oh, well, they shit talked me. Well, then I had to whoop their ass, you know? And then he did. Right. And he knew it. But he also, because of the way he was, invited challenge in every aspect of his life. And sometimes with the gambling thing, maybe in some ways where he couldn't always, you know, live up to the challenge he set. Luckily in basketball, that never happened, but you could see it was happening all around him, where other players would come and they would want to hurt him, where other teams would come and they would want to hurt him, where his other teammates would, in some cases, resent his attention or position compared to them. Like Scottie Pippen, I think famously was known as like a great basketball player who lived in the shadow of Jordan for his whole career. And this is what you were getting to, right? Which is how did he pull others up to where he is instead of climbing over others to get to where he is? And you know, I think at the end of the show, you start to see through the interviews, people understanding that their whole lives kind of are what they are because of their time with Michael Jordan. Even his opponents, right? Even his opponents are defined by their games against Michael Jordan where they lost. And they're almost with a smile on their face, like, you know, because they saw how great someone could be, how unstoppable and unmovable of a force someone could be. And I think, and I think just experiencing that for yourself can be a life-changing event that you can then apply and try to see how you can be like that thing that beat you in the rest of your life too.
Yeah. And I don't think I don't get this sense. I don't think he stepped on his teammates. I think he stepped into his teammates in a very aggressive way. And when I think about, you know, the next line is perfect. He says that once you join our team, you lived and played at a certain standard that I played the game, and I wouldn't stand for anything less. So let's just take that at face value, that imagine being a player, and you're right about opponents. Like, no one would know who, you know, Greg Elo was. if you didn't hear that Jordan over Elo, it's good. Like, if you didn't hear that one clip for 3 decades, you wouldn't know who Elo was, man. You just know that poor Elo, right? Like, for the rest of his career, he's defined by that. But there's a right in that comment that he makes, that imagine being a player that comes onto that team and you're coming onto Michael Jordan's team. That's, you know, rising tides raise all ships. Like, you knew that you were coming onto that team and you were about to get just, if you thought you could play hard, well, you're going to play 20% harder. You're going to get 20% better, a little bit better every single day. And I think that's also a huge part of leadership, of being an example. So I that's something else too. It's, when you're Michael Jordan, how do you even coach a personality? How do you lead a personality like Michael Jordan? Somehow Phil Jackson, who's clearly the greatest coach, not even arguably in NBA history, has won more championships than any coach ever, single coach ever in his career. I think that he figured it out, that there's a certain way you have to lead these types of personalities. But Michael, you know, he's like, I keep calling him a lion, because every time you see him in play or off play, He's one of those characters where even standing there expressionless, like a lion, you're fearful of it because you know what's possible, right? If a lion is just sitting there with a blank stare, it's you're just taken aback, like, because you know what's possible with a lion.
Yeah. Well, I think if you were, so I think using the lion as an example, you might come face to face with a lion, and the lion doesn't care about you because the lion has already won just by being the lion. And you've already lost, right?
Right. So, immediately. Like, there's not even and so, like, if I were to, like, challenge the lion, then I'm going to lose badly. Right. So when people would step into the sphere of challenging Michael, they would lose badly. Like a lion loss, they would lose badly, they'd lose everything. Like that whole scene of poor Tony Kukoc, like when Tony thought he was something special, like that poor SOB, man. He left and went back to his league and was like, I am not ready for the NBA. I will tell you that. But there's a part in that of leading by example, of kind of being that, that lion. And also, like he says, that you ask my teammates, one thing that they'll always say is that, one thing about Michael Jordan was he never asked anyone to do something that he didn't effing do himself. Right. That's a big part of leadership too. And again, I admire him for almost everything that he accomplished. And so for me, I'm more or less, Michael, if you're listening to the Scuttlebutt right now, I want you to know that I would be, you would be challenged to find a bigger fan in all that you did for a city and for a world that didn't even know basketball, that knew it once Michael Jordan played the game. And that's what happens when you're great. And there's a tremendous amount of responsibility that comes along with that. And not to mention, there was a part in that episode, or just one of the episodes too, where Dennis Rodman was talking about, like, we don't get paid these big salaries to play basketball, to play the game. We get paid these big salaries to deal with all this other BS, right? That we have to put up with. We're sacrificing our lives, our names. Like, we can never just go places. Like, that's why they have to pay us what they pay us. I thought there was something really true to that. That you lose it. It's like you lose you lose an identity because you gain one that's incredibly public. Like, you never can be private. Michael Jordan can never be a private citizen from the moment he put on basketball shorts, and he received everything that he wished for. That's the crazy part, is like he, oh, woe is him, but it's all relevant. Throughout this whole thing, I'm not sure if Michael Jordan would consider himself happy right now. I don't know. And that's weird to think about, that you can become the greatest of all time. And I'm not sure why, when I saw him throughout the series, there was, there's a sadness in his face. I don't know where it comes from. I could be totally wrong. He'd be the happiest person in the world. I don't feel that way. I don't hear it in his voice. I don't see it in his eyes, because it's like, what's the difference when you see, like an animal that's in the wild versus an animal that's in a cage? Like, it's that to me is what I pulled away from this whole series is, if we are lucky enough, and it's beyond luck, it's like, Michael Phelps, he was genetically designed by God, higher figure, whoever the listeners believe is up there making this happen for all of us creatures down here on this floating ball of mud in space. He literally could produce oxygen faster. His red blood cells could hold more O2 than normal human beings. Like, his feet are like a size 16. The curvature of his legs and the way that his knees naturally through tendon and sinew could bend to the water like a freaking dolphin. He was designed, quite literally, beautifully designed to be the greatest Olympian medal recipient of all time. He was designed that way. And then next thing you know, he's giving ads talking about how depressed he was. We see this all over the place, man. That when the ones who figure out, who are lucky enough to fall into what they were designed to do, it's so rare that you see them kind of ride off into the sunset, fulfilled and happy with where they're at. It's a real challenge for them because they're no longer challenged, and that's a problem.
Yeah. So actually, I have some thoughts on that, and in bodybuilding, there's a saying that you can't beat genetics. Even Arnold Schwarzenegger was known as having weak calves. He just genetically had a hard time building his calves. It was like his flaw, his Achilles heel, so to speak. And the deadly combination is when genetics meets hard work, right? So when you've got the genetics and the natural aptitude for something, then you happen to find that thing, then you put in the hard work, that's unstoppable. And I do really believe that's true. Now, talking about Michael Jordan, at the end of the show, he says, would you have wanted to go for 7? He says, yeah, of course I wanted to go for 7. And he says, well, is it maddening or is it beautiful to, like, whatever they said? I know one, I don't know what they said, something, or was it maddening to stop after 6? And he says, it's maddening. And when I say ego, when I talk about ego and pride, right, this is kind of what I'm talking about, where, he won't be able to rest because he wanted to win. But when you want to win that much, that bad, and you can't walk away, that's for you. That's because you can't resolve your self, your idea of self, where you can't kind of define yourself any other way, where you believe that you do believe, and rightfully so, that you're so great that you could have been the greatest, probably, to this day, probably put him on the court, that's just the will. That's the will to win that made him. That's, unfortunately, it's what makes greats so great. And it's also their ultimate downfall many times. Right. Is it's a pride and ego thing. Because if you want to win 7, if you want to win 8, who's that for? Is it for your team or is it for you? Every time that you win, 1,000 other people lose, on your road to victory.
I don't think we would have seen the same if Michael would have came back. Maybe if Phil came back. Let's put it this way. If the team came back as is, we would have seen another championship team. There's not a doubt in my mind. If you break up that team in any significant way, especially taking like the heart of the team out of it, meaning I think Michael, they say Michael might have been the heart of the team, but I feel like Phil Jackson was a big part of that heart. And I think Michael was was still a very vital organ. But Phil was going to get traded. I think we would have seen an uglier side to the story with Michael if he were given a different team that may not have performed at a similar level. It takes a long time to get to a level. I think, meaning not a level of championship play, but I think there are two things at play here with the Bulls, where not only did you have to play at a championship level, but you had to play at a Michael Jordan level. And I think if other people and personalities would have came into that team that disrupted or challenged that kind of dominance hierarchy inside of that team, I think that would have been a problem, and Michael would have clashed. There wasn't enough room by name or pedigree for anyone else of equal stature. Like no other all-star could have been on that team other than Michael Jordan. And I know Scotty was an all-star. I don't mean that in the sense of an NBA all-star. Another all-star personality similar to Michael. I don't know if it would have worked, which is why we see all these championship recruiting going on to get all these personalities on the team, and they don't win championships.
Yeah.
There needs to be diversity of leadership and personality on teams in order to make them a championship team. That's what made the Bulls so remarkable, is that if I could compare it to a founding team of a company, of a startup, it's like Michael was kind of the founder of that play, right? And Phil Jackson was a really experienced executive chairman who knew exactly how to manage the board of personalities and kept people away from the founding team. And Michael was a great founder, and he had role players, surrounding him where he needed teammates to be strong, where he couldn't be strong all the time. He didn't care that Dennis Rodman went to Vegas. He went and got him and brought him back and said, just give it your all. And he crushed it. Michael couldn't get 30 rebounds a game, but Dennis could. Michael needed Dennis to get 30 rebounds a game. He needed Scottie to get 20 assists a game. He needed Steve Kerr to make the three-pointers because that was his role. He needed Steve to make the shots that mattered and counted when Michael actually gave him the ball. The rest of it was Steve being a great point guard to set up plays to tee up Michael Jordan and their famous offense. So Michael did want, he said it in that clip, he said, I wanted them to win. I wanted to win, of course, but I wanted them to win too. And that goes to your point. Like when it becomes more about Michael wanting to win and not wanting other people on that journey to also be champions, then you're doing it for the wrong reasons.
I agree. And I don't think that that's necessarily the case. Like when we were talking about, I don't think Michael stepped on people to get to the top as much as he stepped with or carried. Or, and in times people carried him for sure, certainly. But I do think what you're talking about, what if it kept going and you might have seen a darker side. Now it's speculation. But I certainly think that it could have been very different. And you could see some self-destructive behavior when winners start to lose. It can be a real, mind fuck.
That's a great way to put that, Max. When winners start to lose.
Have you ever seen somebody who's a real alpha winner type start to lose, and it can get really bad. You can start to see some really crazy behavior, some mentality shift into a dark place. Where I've seen people willing to do anything to win, and then if I've seen people lose to friends who then they get mad at, and storm off. Because they just don't believe that they should lose. And what's that mean? That means that your friend should lose, Like I'm right. Just saying, this is just something I've seen, many times in my own life. So for me, I think I repeat this to myself often. It's just something I say to myself is you can't keep it, which is so I apply. You can apply it to anything, your clothes, your shirt, right? You can't keep it. One day, you're going to leave this planet and you can't keep anything. You can't keep your house. You can't keep your car. You can't keep your money. You can't keep your friends. You can't keep anything. Anything that you love, there's only one way to keep it, and it's to kind of keep it going through the world. You kind of got to give it away. Anything that you want, the only way to keep something is to give it away and keep it going in the world, or else it just dies with you. And I think that being a champion is like that, where you can't keep it. You can't be the best forever. But what you can do is you can make the next best person. You can enable the next best person. You can get out of the way for the next best person, train them. So one thing that Jordan does in the show, I think there's one clip. I wish I had the exact quote for the clip. Is he's playing against somebody. I think it's the guy who said, "Oh, you're Jordan, huh? You're the man that everyone says you are." And he goes, "Well, I'm going up on a court and I see I can go left, I can go right, I can fade." And he's kind of saying all these things he knows he can do because he just sees things that other people don't see, right? He sees it. He sees the future because he's done it. He understands the game so well. He understands his specialty so well that any scenario that could happen, he's already played out in his mind. He knows exactly how it's going to happen because he's done all these mental rehearsals. He's played all these games. Maybe you don't see, if you're listening, maybe you don't see things like that. I would say find the person who sees things differently than you and latch onto that person and learn what you can from them. Because there's always that one person who just can kind of see, almost like predict the future of what's going to happen. And you're usually right because they just have an understanding of the psyche of the game or whatever it is, the job. And they just know how people think and how they act. And I think everyone has something that they're like that with. If you, whatever you're doing, if you're not the person who has it, find the person who has it and kind of see what you can learn from them. It was obvious Michael had that.
And you brought up a great kind of philosophical point. One of my favorite sayings or phrases that's taken away from Stoicism is memento mori. Have you ever heard of memento mori?
No.
So memento mori translated like directly, translated directly into English is that remember you must die, right? So it's not designed as a phrase, you know, pardon me. It's not designed as a phrase to be morbid or promote fear, but it's supposed to kind of inspire, motivate, and clarify something that, you know, we see all the time, that everything comes to an end. Everything comes to an end. And there's something calming in that, right? And a compliment that was paid to Michael throughout that show, and I forget who paid him. I think it was a journalist, but he said Michael was always in the moment.
Yeah.
That part struck me. He said he was always present. Like wherever he was always there, which you can't say about 99.9% of people walking around. Is Max and Joe right now are sitting here having a great conversation about things that matter, and diving deep into questions that we ask ourselves and that we ask of others. And when to think of a professional athlete, stellar athlete like Michael, who was always in the moment when he could be so many other places, that's hard to practice. That's hard to do. And so maybe that's also the downfall, is that when people begin to truly live in the moment, you begin to realize how fleeting these moments are. And it could be overwhelming, even more overwhelming than not being in the present. And all of a sudden it's 30 years have gone by, and you've been focusing on the wrong things. And now you're rushing to give back and contribute to a world that doesn't want your contributions any longer. I mean, I saw it in philanthropy all the time. You know, there's a reason why I would imagine a world like, thinking of Michael and how he ended this. It made me sad to think that at the end of that segment, to get into the nonverbal a little bit, like he sat back and he put his palms up like this, and he kept saying, you know, look. And anytime anybody says or opens a conversation off with look, it's you've had it. You've reached a certain point. Like never do you answer the phone, you know, with your mother and be like, look, I love you, mom. Okay. I love you. Like it just doesn't go like that. But he's like, look, I don't have to do this. I'm only doing this because it is who I am. It's how I played the game. That was my mentality. And the whole time he has his hands up, which, like, none of us need to be experts in nonverbal, that if you were walking into someone and they were like doing this, it means stop. And then quite literally you do more research on it. It means I've had enough, stop. I'm getting overwhelmed. I can't talk about this anymore. And, you know, then his tense shift happened where he goes, if you don't want to play that way, then don't play that way. And then he goes break, which I thought was interesting, because the whole time he talked about how he played, I don't have to do this. I'm only doing this because of who I am. It's how I played the game. That was my mentality. If you don't want to play that way, then don't play that way. And he was kind of talking to everyone at that point right now, currently, kind of saying like, if you're going to hate on me, if you don't play that way, then don't play that way. That's on you. But that's how I played the game. So don't hate on me, you know, break. I'm done. Like, I don't need to justify myself anymore. Like, good Lord, you know, I need a break. And to me, that was, to see him get emotional like that. It could be for so many different reasons. I'm not trying to pretend that I understand the reasons for him getting emotional, but I think we all have our guesses. And we all have things that I'm sure we put our hands up and say, okay, like, I can't talk about this anymore. It's too much. And I've done enough. But that was really moving for me to see him get emotional in that way, even after this long arc, this hero's arc. It's not just a journey. It's a hero's journey. It's not just an arc. It's the hero's arc that he went through.
Yeah.
That we're looking back on right now. So
yeah,
it's powerful for me.
Well, yeah, it is. You know, with the loss of his father, leaving, coming back, going on a side quest there with baseball.
Right.
It really is. And the thing I wonder is, it's difficult for when you're looked at by your teammates as what you feel is like the wrong perception. It can be really frustrating. Like, how can you not get what I was doing? You know, maybe that's what it was.
Right.
Like talking about old teammates who kind of say, well, he was an asshole or whatever. Like, how at this point, after all this time, do you not get what I was doing for you? You know, like I can't I can't take it anymore. You know, like you don't understand, you don't see it. You know, how can you not see it? It's so clear, you know? Have you ever been so frustrated with something that seems so obvious to you and is lost on others? It can be that can be maddening.
Yeah, that's great insight, Max. That's a great point. Like I it's almost like a parent who did everything for his children, and the child still has all these wild complaints about their parents. I always joke when I'm on the island of Coronado, and I see some angry looking teenagers kind of walking around, right? I know you get this. This is more of an inside joke, I guess, for people who have been on the island. But whenever I see like angry teenagers walking around the island of Coronado, clearly in a rebellious state in their life, I always say to myself, I hate you, mom and dad. You gave me everything, right? Like they have nothing to complain about, right? Their parents, and maybe that's part of the problem, is they did give them everything. But Michael, he tried to prop people up in the best way that he knew how. And I think we're all, hopefully, leaders out there are all doing that. They're trying to do it the best way they know how. Yeah, there's so much to think about in that one scene, and that's why it struck me so hardcore.
There's you were talking about, I remember this episode about presents, and he's getting on a bus, I think is when they're talking about it. And what I think about that, this is what I thought when I saw it. This is what I think about now. It took me a long time. Only in the last couple of years did I start understanding how to use a calendar. Not technically, because I know we just talked about this. I still don't get it from a technological standpoint on how to use like shared calendars and stuff. I'm horrible. But as far as using a calendar to block out my time with people, which I never really understood. I never really was big on that. I'm like, okay, I'm doing something at 1. I'll just make sure I leave like 2 hours in case it goes long or whatever. And, if I have something else, I'll do that at 3. And then I'll flex on that. I'll do more, I'll do less, whatever, make more time, less time. But I'm using how much time I block out for something based on how much time I have. So if I have a lot of time, I'll block out a lot of time. If I have a little amount of time, I'll use a little bit amount of time. That's fucking meaningless. It's not like things are going to take as long as I have for them to take. And then should I make them take longer? Should I rush them based on how busy I am? But now I look at it like this. Like, let's say I have 2 hours and I need to talk to somebody. I'm like, hey, I can talk for 15 minutes. And it's going to start and it's going to end in a 15-minute span. But in those 15 minutes, I'm 100% committed to whatever we're talking about, and it's going to be purposeful, and we're going to get to the point, And that's how I use the calendar now. And I didn't learn that from anywhere. I just kind of made that up. So maybe that's totally makes no sense. But if I just use whatever time I have, because I have it, that's purposeless. But if I say, hey, in 15 minutes, we have to resolve this. Like, what are we talking about? Why are we talking? Let's get to the point. If we need to talk more, let's figure out another time to talk. Collect your thoughts. We'll talk again. And then that's it. And then that's how I'm using my calendar now. And it's the only time that using a calendar ever made sense to me was to use it that way. We used to have, you'd have meetings at work for no reason, and you go on for 2 hours, and everyone leaves, and nobody does anything. Or can we sit down for 5 minutes with a good idea of what we're here to talk about and get it done? Does that make any sense?
That's right. Oh, 100%. It took me a long time to understand that. And I learned it through hard working my way into successful people to have conversations with them, and realize that in the beginning, I took offense to the directness and to the, I have 20 minutes, 15 minutes, and in some cases I have 10 minutes. Or in one case, I have 8 minutes in front of an elevator. So like, that's a real story. Someone that's very important and amazing. And he's remarkable and I admire him. So I would take the 8 minutes. But the point is, I had a recent call with a very successful nonprofiteer who I admire, very young, 26 years old, but created a organization with a $20 to $30 million a year in operating budgets for a nonprofit, and so very successful. He's created quite a mission, and I believe in it. So when I got in touch with him, because I'm gonna raise some money for the organization later on this year, and he said, "Hey, I have to go in 10 minutes. I have another commitment." And right there, I thought to myself, I wish I had the courage at 26 years old, starting the foundation, to get on the phone with someone and say, I only have 10 minutes because I have another commitment, to someone who wanted to raise money for my organization. Like I didn't have the courage to do that. And I also hadn't come to the conclusion yet at 26 years old, the value of time, not my time. There's a big difference there. The value of time, not my time. And it took me a long time to understand that. And I started to actually kind of like frown, or not frown and not judge, but think long and hard, when I would hear people say like, yeah, I got on this call and man, 3 hours later, I thought to myself, my God, what an amazing thing to be able to just blow 3 hours like that. Like I don't have that. And it's not because I'm so important. It's the opposite. It's I'm trying to do important things. And I know that to do that, I heard a crazy story yesterday from a very successful VC. And he was talking about, in this panel that I was watching, he talked about, this is about Michael. This is Michael Jordan. This is about any person that is great, whose name we know and recognize for all that they've done. They had a certain amount of obsession. They were obsessed. They were completely obsessed from the moment they opened their eyes to the moment they closed them. That he jokes that this VC, his claim to fame is that he was chauffeured by Steve Jobs once and chauffeured by Bill Gates. And he was talking in this case in particular. This is an epic VC. And he was chauffeured around in the early days by both of those young entrepreneurs at the time. And he said he gets in the car with Bill Gates and the radio was pulled out of the car. And, he goes, what happened to your radio? And he goes, well, straight face, dead serious. He goes, well, I thought that, the radio, I'd find myself like listening to it and not thinking about Microsoft. So I took it out of my car. And I thought to myself, wow. That is a level of, and I've been there. I've been in a place in my life where I was so obsessed about an idea that I used to do things like that. But anyways, that's how Michael was. And to me, that is there is a trait of obsessiveness to these greats, to the greats. And you know it when you see it, you know it when you come across it. There's something about the energy around those people. Like you said, you want to just grab onto their cape, right? It's part of the reason why I wanted to get into venture in the first place.
I think obsessed is the right word. You have to be, right? You have to be obsessed.
You have to be.
And the question you have to ask yourself is, obsession is dangerous, right? If you're when you're obsessed, you'll do crazy things, right? You might walk away from other things. You might walk away from friends and family, other commitments, and you have to ask yourself, is that really what I want? Like, if I get what I want, my dream, would that make me happy? Because then what you're left with is success in what originally was success in your mind, but you've been looking down at the pad and paper for so long that when you look up, what's changed around you? It's like in Orson, the Time Machine, H.G. Wells, right? H.G. Wells, Time Machine. He gets in it and he sees his world dissolve around him, right? And he goes into the future, right? He goes into the future, and everything's gone. but he did it. You know, he time traveled, and his whole world disappeared around him while he was sitting there in a time machine. So don't let your obsession be your time machine, I guess. This is what I think about, right? Like, is there anything that I am so committed to where I have that obsession where if other things in my life started to disappear, would that be worth it? That's the way I look at it. And I don't know what to tell you. I'm not here to tell you what to think about that. It just think about it and decide. If you were in that time machine and your world dissolves around you, would you be happy that you were in that time machine?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Again, Max, I could have a dozen of these conversations with you every single week, man. And I love watching the rise of Scuttlebutt and watching people enjoy it and getting texts from people who love listening to you. And you're just doing a great job, man. You're bringing something special to the world. So I thank you for doing that.
Thanks, Joe. Maybe this is part 1 of this Last Dance series, and we can do.
I hope so, man.
2.
There's plenty more episodes and deep things to talk about.
Yeah, you know what I'll do is I'm gonna go through and I'm gonna pull some clips from the show. If you have any clips that if you want to send me, just text me. Like if you know some that you like, I'll pull some clips and I'll have some clips queued up for next time. And
you got it.
I'll make them on the Zoom here, and then we'll go from there.
Love it. All right, brother. Thank you again for your time. I appreciate it.
All right, go spend some time with your family.
That's right, man. I'll talk to you in a bit.
All right,
Bye-bye.
John. Bye.